Good morning, friends, and welcome back to NPTEL online certification course on public speaking. My dear friends, in the previous lecture, we talked about elocution and recitation, followed by a lecture on debates. Now, all of you must realize that life is made up of both small moments and big moments. And both these moments are very important in the sense that at times you have to participate in a small group communication, and on other occasions you have to take part in major or large occasions. Now, when we talk about small group communications, we have already talked about debates, we have talked about conversations, we have talked about negotiations, and now is the time that we talked about big moments, and for that matter, communication in bigger groups. And that is why today we are going to start speeches. Now, all of you might be thinking that till now, some way or the other, we have referred to speech. And now we are going to talk about speeches. So, where lies the difference? So, in this lecture, we shall be touching upon what actually are speeches, because all of us at some point of the time or the other have to deliver speeches, and the occasions can be various. Right from your college age, you might have been exposed to giving speeches, but then once you enter a professional world, you will get numerous such occasions when you have to make speeches. Now, when we simply talk about the word speech, all of us have a general impression that speech is the faculty or power of speaking. It is actually a form of oral communication. It is the ability to express one's thoughts and emotions by speech sounds and gestures. So, speech is a form of communication in spoken language, which is made by a speaker before an audience for a given purpose. But when we come to giving speeches, it actually changes its meaning, in the sense that the preliminary goal of speech is actually to be understood by large audience, and not only to be understood, because many of us often think that speech is a very common activity. It is, of course, a performative art, as we have been talking about, but try to understand that speech does not mean simply to impress your audience through the jungle of your words. Now, speech extends the motive of simple communication, and it is audience centric. So, before we go to understand what are the requisites of speech, how one should prepare for the speech, how there can be different nuances for delivering different speeches, it is time that we took one quote by William Penn, who said, "Speak properly and in as few words as you can, but always plainly, I mean simply. For the end of speech is not ostentation, but to be understood." So, imagine one gives a speech and one takes extra care to prepare one's speech, and for that he has made a jungle of words, of flowery expressions, and the audience members every now and then are trying their best to understand, and they are not able to understand. That cannot be called a sort of good speech. As I mentioned earlier, that we have talked about conversations, debates, group discussions. So when we talk about speech, naturally one another activity that comes to our mind is presentation. At times many people confuse speech with presentation and vice versa. But there are certain differences between speech and presentations. So here you can find, on the one side I have talked about the attributes of speech, and on the other you can find the qualities of presentation. There are several factors which are actually important or mandatory for speech as well as for presentation. Speech is actually a talk or address. Speech requires a broad vision. Speech is audience centric and it has a less rigid setup. Whereas in presentation, you will find that presentation most often becomes technical, it actually becomes very formal, it is executed and practiced in professional domains. But when we come to speeches, they actually require emotional responses. And that is why when we compare the language of both speech and presentation, we find that there is a sort of difference. A presentation which can be enacted in professional settings is extremely detailed and it requires specific objective. So, by now you might have understood the difference between speech and presentation. Now, you might also be thinking about the various components or ingredients of speech. One thing that is very important to note here is, for any kind of speech, or of course for even for presentation also, the very first thing is topic. So, what topic one is going to speak on? I mean, one should ask oneself why and what. And then time. You will find that in most of the professional presentations you are allotted some amount of time. In speech also you are given time, but since the emotional factor is involved, on many occasions we have found that time actually does not become a constraint because the audience members are so involved. Of course, language is different, and we have been talking about the use of language in various situations, and we shall also have a separate lecture on the use of language. Then comes the style, and then also comes pattern. Now, imagine that you are going to deliver a speech. As a school child or a college going one, you might have at times found the opportunity to deliver a talk. Sometimes you get the topic of the talk much in advance, and sometimes you get on the spot. But if you are going to give a speech, what should actually you think of? How should you make yourself prepared for the speech? So, the very first thing is title. The title of the speech. What is the title of the speech? You are given a choice at times. Of course, when it is professional presentations, the host organization provides you the topic, but when you have to deliver a speech, on many occasions you have the freedom unless and until the occasion so demands it. So, the very first thing is you actually have to tailor your speech. You have first to think about the introduction, and in introduction you can talk about why this topic. The introduction has to relate to the topic. Then when you think about the introduction, you also need to ask yourself why this subject. Naturally, you might be an expert in that area, and why you only, why not other person, because some way or the other you have that much of experience and that much of expertise in that area. Now, when you think of the introduction, you are supposed to think about the opening. In opening, in most of the cases, the very first thing is how to grab the attention of the audience. We have already discussed that audience members are different, they are varied, they have different languages, different cultures. So, as a speaker, your main task is how to grab the attention of the audience and then tell them. After you give the introduction, you have to tell them what you are going to tell them, isn't it? And then once you have talked about what you are going to tell them. Now comes the most important thing, that is the body of your speech. This body of your speech actually talks about the story. It actually talks about something depending upon the topic, and then once you have covered the body or once you have structured it, then you are going to conclude. But before concluding, you are going to preview. So tell them when you are going to conclude, how to conclude. You must tell them, because we always say that there needs to be a sort of reinforcement, a sort of re-emphasis as to what you have told them. Tell them what you have told them, and then you have to close your speech. So when you close your speech, it should be in such a way that the audience members most often get an opportunity to remember the concluding lines. When we have structured, or when we are in the process of delivering this speech, actually we must not be oblivious to the fact that a speech is first written. So a lot of homework has to be done. Now you know your audience members, and on other occasions you do not know your audience members. But when you are tailoring your speech, you need to follow a pattern. So pattern is actually very important. Majority of the audience members actually want to see the sequence that the speaker has maintained in his speech. Now here you can find that how you can create a sort of pattern. These patterns may vary depending upon the topic. So as a speaker, your effective communication depends more upon the information, but nonetheless the proper organization of your information. So as a public speaker, one must organize one's thoughts and should keep in mind that when he is trying to create an outline, because you are not going to read the entire speech with the help of the paper that you have in your hand. So let there be a pattern. Based on the pattern, you can create an outline here. Here you can find the patterns can be different. It can be chronological, it can be spatial, it can be biographical, it can be topical, it can be compare contrast. I mean, depending upon the topic, there are certain topics which will require a sort of chronological pattern, meaning thereby in a time sequence. Sometimes when you are going to talk about something where you need to mention or describe, naturally you will follow a spatial pattern which will talk about space and the location. Sometimes when you are going to talk about a person or people, naturally you will follow a biographical pattern. Sometimes when you are going to talk about an event, you will follow a topical pattern. Sometimes when you are going to talk about a problem, then perhaps you are going to talk about a problem solution method. Sometimes when you are going to touch upon some such abstract ideas, you are going to follow a psychological pattern, my dear friend. Now, you might also be curious to know how all these patterns have different attributes. So before we come to prepare our speech, let us also try to understand that how a problem cause solution speech pattern works. Now for every speech maker, what one should keep in mind is why he is going to give this speech. So specific purpose must be told. So when we talk about problem cause solution speech pattern, the main categories of organization would be, you will talk about the problem statement, then you will talk about the cause, then we will talk about the prospective solutions. Imagine that you are going to give a speech on unemployment. Now, you first will talk about the problem statement, that the number of unemployed youths in your country is increasing day by day. And then you will talk about what are the causes. So, and after you have discussed the causes, analyzed the causes, then as a speaker, you can also tell them what could be the solutions, prospective solutions. Say for example, here I have taken one example of how one can start an afforestation drives. Nowadays, deforestation is on the move, but then there can be some people who want to deliver a talk on afforestation. So naturally, they will first talk about the problem that how air pollution and global warming is increasing day by day. And what are the causes? The rapid urbanization and deforestation. And then you will talk about the solution, and the solution is afforestation drives. Now, having said this, let us also talk about another pattern, that is causal speech pattern. Actually, it is based on cause. It is actually woven on cause and effect methodology, where you can relate the speech topic to make it appear or seem more organized and coherent. Say for example, if I am going to tell you about the importance of public speaking, I am delivering a talk on public speaking, naturally the cause will be public speaking posits itself as a basic prerequisite to enter the professional world. So this is actually the cause. And what will be the solution? Effect? Public speaking enables social connection and growth of an individual into a vocal leader, isn't it? So this is causal speech pattern. And then, as I said, that there can be another pattern which can be psychological speech pattern. So it is actually created psychologically. Say for example, somebody going to talk about meditation as a key factor in alleviating the pain and the stress. So when he will talk about the problem, he will actually introduce it in such a psychological manner as to he will start how meditation enhances brain function. Such a sort of psychological speech pattern takes a logical approach towards the selected topic. And if you make it, or if you orient it sequentially, you will find that it will be very easier for the audience members to follow and understand. So once you have started, once you have introduced that how meditation starts or enhances brain function, then you come to how brain regulates stress related hormones, and finally you give the solution that meditation is the solution, how to meditate effectively. So this is psychological speech pattern. Then comes biographical. At times we talk about people. You might have found that during your school or college days, you might have been asked to deliver a talk, and the talk should be based on a very important person. Now, in such cases, what you need to do is you actually need to arrange it in a chronological manner, meaning thereby in a time sequence manner, in a manner where you can talk about one's early life, one's youth, one's development, one's achievement, one's old age. So for such a speech, when you are going to talk about biographically, you are actually detailing the accomplishments of the person. You can also follow the order of hierarchy of the accomplishments rather than their in time sequence. This is called biographical speech pattern. Say, and in such a case, the specific purpose will be to inform listeners about the life of an important person. Say for example, here I have taken Anne Frank, the role of Anne Frank during World War II. So naturally we'll talk about the early life, then we'll talk about life writing, and then we'll also talk about after death, I mean posthumous fame and impact. So this is a biographical speech pattern. Next is a categorical speech pattern, where it will be very much topical. Categorical or topical is actually the most prevalent pattern for speech organization, and here you will find that it is divided into smaller constituents topic wise. There can be some subsets also. It may be ordered in a sort of chunking, that is, you chunk every piece of information, and these subsets may not need to follow any strict chronological or time sequence order, but must be coherent. I mean, must be related in such a manner with the specific purpose. Say for example, if you want to start a yoga drive, or if you are going to initiate yoga classes and you want the youngsters to join that. So, the first you will talk about are the advantages of yoga for physical health. Then another sub theme will be for psychological harmony. I mean, you can talk about how yoga helps in creating harmony, wellness and all. And then finally, the third subset can be how yoga plays a very important role in spiritual enhancement or spiritual development. Now, again, we have one more pattern, that is compare contrast speech pattern. In this sort of pattern, I mean, you actually start comparing, a pattern which is built upon drawing comparison between two main points. So, this sort of speech entails a discussion where comparison is the main part. Say for example, in such a way, when you are, suppose you are going to talk about two newly developed softwares. So, naturally you have to tell them where are the differences. So, first you will talk about the advantages of one software, then we will talk about or describe the advantages of the other, and then you will make a sort of comparative analysis, so that the audience members get to know, because we have already talked about in the beginning that the main aim of a speech is to be understood and not to impress the audience members. So, if you do it in a better manner, I think audience members will find it easier to understand. And then spatial speech pattern. Now, spatial speech pattern, actually this is very independent, fine. It works independently of each other, but then what is of prime importance here is geographical location, I mean space. Different spatial orders can be there of any component or of any object. For example, the organizational pattern of a speech on, if the title is respiratory process, how, breathing process during yoga or something else. So, naturally your specific purpose will be to explain the importance or the significance of human respiratory system. Then sub-theme will be to locate and describe the nasal passage. Naturally here we come to location. And then another sub-theme will be to describe the windpipe, the larynx, the pharynx. I mean, naturally you will be talking about all these things. And then again there can be another sub-theme where you will talk about the lungs, and the fourth sub-theme will be you will create a spatial speech order to discuss how respiratory process takes place. If you do like this, don't you think that audience members will have a lot of advantage and they will be curious enough to know what the speaker is going to say. We can also spend a little bit of time on chronological speech pattern, though we have said, but then in chronological speech patterns, what can be the subtopics that you might be thinking when we are talking about the timeline, when you are organizing it? So, what we'll do, suppose we are talking about a famous romantic poet, fine, and his contribution during the French Revolution. Say for that matter, if we take William Wordsworth. So, naturally, initially we will begin the content and the style of Wordsworth's poetry, then we will talk about his temperament in his literary corpus, and then also in the stages of French Revolution, and then finally we will analyze the literary content and style of writings in the later period of the French Revolution, meaning thereby we will try to relate how in Wordsworth's poetry there was actually an influence and impact of French Revolution. What is the specific objective? The specific objective here is to inform the audience about Wordsworth's writing with respect to the French Revolution. Now, when you talk about the pattern and the order, we must also know why we follow this, because of some purpose. And the purpose is, if it is chronological order, the purpose will be to explain the history. The purpose will be to tell the story of an experience, or to explain how to do something, and then to explain the steps in a process. If it is a spatial, my dear friend, so we will actually create in the audience a desire to visualize something as you want as a speaker to see them. And we will also make use of non-verbals. We have already talked about non-verbals. So while you are describing an object, naturally your hands, your fingers will be in a sort of sync. So to create a main impression using these senses, say for example sight, touch, smell, we have talked about the non-verbals, and then how to create an order of importance that you are, since you are mature enough, you will know how to prioritize them by their importance, by their significance, by their advantages. Now, having discussed the patterns of speech, now you might be thinking that once you know the pattern, how are you going to act? My dear friends, your speech is written now, and you might be bubbling with joy when you can get the time to deliver your speech. But remember, before you do that, let me warn you or tell you or advise you that nothing is the best way like preparation for a speech. And that is why it is said that preparation is the best antidote, my dear friend. What should you do as a speaker? Because much of the homework you do before you give the speech. So let us always prepare more material than required, because you never know how much time you are going to engage the audience with. And another thing that is of prime importance is, let us not be very fussy about packing everything and anything, because on many occasions you will find that audience members have a prior information on certain topics. So if you can mix the familiar with the unfamiliar, then perhaps the talk will become very interesting. And then coherence, as I have said, coherence is very important. Fine. One of the authors and critics on speaking effectively says that it is better if one can use the gestalt psychologist framework, where one of the major gestalt theorists, namely Max Wertheimer, provides 5 laws. What are these 5 laws? Similarity, proximity, closure, good continuation, and membership character. You will find that if you are going to deliver a speech and when you follow a pattern of comparative analysis, naturally you will show first the similarity and then the dissimilarity. If you are trying to say something and you are trying to make your canvas broad on a particular topic, you will show proximity. Suppose the trees which are in a proper order, the cars which have been kept in a proper sequence. And then finally, when you have done all this, then perhaps you can, because as a speaker you want to win the crowd, which I have been already saying. My dear friends, let your speech end on such a note that your speech becomes memorable. How to make your speech memorable? Audience members cannot remember everything. That is why if you have made efficient and effective use of language in your speech by providing certain keywords or by highlighting certain keywords with the help of repetitions, keywords and reinforcement, then naturally many of the audience members will have something to take away and they will remember some very significant lines that you mentioned in your speech. So, make your speech as memorable as possible. Now, you might be thinking that when you have already made all these preparations, how to begin your speech? Well begun is half done. It is a very famous saying. So, when you are going to introduce, when you are going to begin your speech, fine, assume a fundamental significance in creating such an impression that the audience listen to your talk. We have already said, captivate your crowd in the beginning. How to captivate your crowd in the beginning? maybe by some catchy phrase, maybe by some anecdote, maybe by some story, maybe by asking some question. Actually, as a speaker, you have to establish your ethos, my dear friend. Having done that, once you have made a rapport, as we have discussed in some of the lectures, then is the time that you reveal your topic off the top. Because initially you are trying to captivate them, you are trying to make them curious. Now you are going to reveal the topic and in a very engaging manner. And then when you have discussed everything, now preview, now make use of repetitions. Say, we have today discussed the important stages of Wordsworth's life as a romantic poet and how French Revolution had an impact on Wordsworth's mind, on Wordsworth's psyche. And then you can come to close. So how to begin the speech? Here are certain ways. You can read at your leisure and pleasure. So in the very first instance, you will capture the attention of the audience by luring the audience with a short story. I mean, anecdote, as I said. Sometimes you can shock them by asking a question and then establish your ethos. Tell them about your competence. I mean, you cannot tell them in a telling manner, but the way you speak, they should have an impression that you know your subject well. Establish credibility, which we have been saying, and then reveal the topic by a single strong declarative sentence. And then you also should try to create a sort of impact, intended impact in your speech. Once you have done all this, please preview and try to find some relevance, relatability of the content for your audience. Now, as I said, one must begin well, but one must also end well. How to wind up the talk? That is often a problem. Many people often think that if they can speak longer, they will be remembered longer. No, short events are remembered more. If you can impress your crowd and captivate their minds and play upon with your words of wisdom and provide the key words, then perhaps they will remember so many things of your speech. So when you are going to conclude or when you are going to end your talk, I mean wrapping up, winding it up, so let there be a memorable closer of your talk, which is an indispensable part of the speech process. How to do that? When you conclude, come to the traditional stage, which actually can tell the audience that the speech is nearing ends. We'll discuss in detail how, with the help of the connectives, and we will be providing certain stations, certain signal points, so that these audience members may know that the speech is coming to an end. Summarize, my dear friend, preview, and then when you come to end your talk, leave a trail. Create interest in the audience to learn more about the topic by referring to it. I mean, if I am talking about Wordsworth naturally, I'll say, my dear friends, those who are interested in Wordsworth's poetry can, of course, read majority of his poems, which are in the form of a collection, isn't it? If one can go through the prelude, some of the parts of the prelude, they can find another entertainment and enrichment about Wordsworth's poetic corpus. And then finally, when you are going to conclude, let there be a note of finality. Prepare an impactful closing statement as a memorable mental takeaway for your audience. So if you have followed all these patterns, and if you have taken care of how to begin and how to end your talk, in and between whatever content or material you have packed, my dear friend, that actually is going to provide a sort of satisfaction, a sort of pleasure to the audience members. So having said that, let me come to wind up this talk by a famous quote of Publius Syrus, a Latin writer who was best known for his aphorisms. And this Publius Syrus was a contemporary of Cicero. We have already talked about Cicero. Now let us see what Publius Syrus says. Speech is the mirror of the soul, As a man speaks, so is he. So, as a public speaker, the way you speak, so you are. Because by speaking, you reveal your own personality. And I do hope that with the sort of lectures you are being provided with, you are going to get converted into an effective speaker, much sought after, much remembered for his words of wisdom. With these words, let me end this talk. I wish you all a good day. Thank you very much.